In October of 1999, Red Company and Sega held the Sakura Project 2000 announcement event at the Tokyo Kosei Nenkin Kaikan Concert Hall. There they revealed not only the world's first proper look at Sakura Wars 3, but also formally unveiled a curious spin-off title known as Sakura Wars GB for the Game Boy Color. That's right, one of Sega's biggest franchises at the time was making itself comfy on the platform from their biggest rival, Nintendo, years before Sega bowed out of the hardware business themselves. Looking at the history of the Sega-Nintendo rivalry, it seems unthinkable for that to have happened before Sega became a third-party publisher. But if you take a closer look, you can see the signs leading up to it. Flashback to 1997, 2 years prior. Sega had just discontinued their own portable console, the Game Gear, leaving Nintendo's Game Boy victorious in the handheld wars. With the internet still in its infancy and mobile gaming still in utero, Sega had nowhere else to turn for their smaller-scale bite-size efforts than their main competitor's portable system. However, Sega wouldn't be publishing these games themselves, at least not at first. Enter Media Factory, the most aptly named company in history. Perhaps most famous for producing the Pokemon trading card game in Japan early on, they also produced books, film, music, and yes, video games. Early on in Sega's flirtations with rival systems, it was Media Factory who would publish games based on Sega's IPs, starting with a port of Columns to Nintendo's Super Famicom in August of 1999, followed by Columns GB Osamu Tezuka characters on the Game Boy and Game Boy Color in November of the same year. Man, and here I thought I was done talking about Columns. Following these early outings on Nintendo hardware, it was time to tackle one of Sega's juggernaut franchises. The existence of Sakura Wars GB was revealed to the world in issue 531 of Weekly Famitsu magazine, a scoop so exciting they felt the need to plaster it on the cover twice. The particulars of this reveal are surprisingly complicated, so I'll save that for later on in this video. But for now, just know that this announcement caught everyone by surprise, Sega themselves included. Perhaps more surprising though is how threadbare this reveal was. No gameplay details, screenshots, or anything. Just a silly mock-up thrown together by Famitsu's editorial staff, promising a bit more than what the Game Boy Color could realistically deliver. Note, the details would have to wait until the Sakura Project 2000 event, where it was finally shown off to a live audience, with series creator Oji Hiroi pitching it to the crowd as, quote, a game even children can enjoy. The game wouldn't be a port of the first game, as was initially speculated, but rather an original story taking place during the events of the first game. In it, players would assume the role of a self-insert character as they get recruited to join the Flower Division under Ogami's command, as part of a trial enlistment program. They would have 30 days to hone their skills, learn how to pilot a Kobu, and develop rapport with the rest of the squad, before getting ranked on their performance at the end. The game would eventually release on July 28, 2000, alongside the Pocket Sakura and a matching cherry pink model Game Boy Color system. Yes, Virginia, Nintendo produced hardware for a Sega franchise, while Sega themselves were still in the hardware game. The game was developed by Jupiter, who these days are probably best known for making a zillion Picross games on the Switch. Not hating, by the way, I love me some Picross. And, as previously mentioned, Media Factory would handle sole publishing duties. It's long been rumored that all this was made possible due to a deal bartered between Sega and Nintendo, where Nintendo would get Sakura Wars GB and produce the Pocket Sakura and Cherry Pink Game Boy Color, while Sega would get educational Pokemon titles on the Sega Pico and produce a Pikachu Edition Sega Pico console. However, in all of my searches, I have yet to find any concrete sources for these claims, neither in English nor in Japanese. The theory does make a certain amount of sense, especially given the links both Media Factory and Jupiter shared with the Pokemon franchise, some of which I've already brought up, and others I'll touch upon later. However, I personally doubt it. After all, this wasn't even the first Sega franchise that had found its way on the Game Boy, and just like Columns GB, Sega's involvement with Sakura Wars GB was minimal anyway. What's more, Sakura Wars GB and the Pocket Sakura came out in 2000, whereas the first Sega Pico Pokemon game, Catch the Numbers, wouldn't see release until 2002, well after Sega had already become a third-party publisher, by which point such a trade would have been unnecessary anyway. Before we go into talking about the game itself, a few things I should probably get out of the way first. I'll be using a fan translation like I did with Columns 2, but a lot of it will still be text I translated myself. That's because I actually worked on this fan translation. However, despite the fact that I worked on this, there are some differences compared to how I do translation for these videos, mostly boiling down to the terminology used. The translation for GB tries to remain consistent with the preceding fan translations, whereas my videos attempt to use the same terminology as the most recent official localization, that being of the PS4 game as of this recording. All this to say, while the game footage on screen may say, for example, Imperial Assault Troop, I'll be sticking with Imperial Combat Review for this voiceover, in order to maintain a consistent through-line for my own videos, so that you viewers don't get too much whiplash watching these back-to-back. With all that disclaimery stuff out of the way, let's hop to it. It's the year 2000, you're in Japan, and you just purchased a copy of Sakura Wars GB. One of the first things you realize is how pitch perfect this game's presentation is, even before you actually start the game. From the moment you open the box, you're greeted with a little picture of Sakura wishing you good luck for the challenges ahead. Upon slapping it into your Game Boy Color and booting it up, you're immediately met with a one-time-only cutscene where Tsubaki thanks you for purchasing the game. Then, when starting a new game or loading a save file, you're met with original voice audio recorded especially for this game. Not just one line from Sakura, but multiple possible lines from every member of the Flower Division. Then there's the graphics, and boy is Sakura Wars GB a powerhouse for this system, starting from the title screen and never letting up. The game does a fantastic job translating the character portraits from the console games to the smaller screen, and the background work is superb. The bromides in particular are quite impressive, being various CGs from Sakura Wars 2 scaled down to Game Boy Color spec. The music is no slouch either, with skillful 8-bit conversions of songs from the first two games. Once the dazzle wears off, though, you're left to confront the game on its own terms, and this is where your mileage with this game may vary. First things first, don't go into this expecting a one-to-one recreation of the traditional Sakura Wars experience. Though it is, in many respects, a suitable facsimile, there's no turn-based strategy battles, no emphasis on character arcs, none of that. Instead, you're basically getting something mechanically similar to a dating sim, only instead of raising stats to impress girls, you're raising stats to fight robots. Which in turn may or may not impress girls, whom then you can date. Look, it'll be easier to explain if I just walk you through it. You have 30 days to spend at the theater, and most days are divided into 5 parts: morning and afternoon free time, morning and afternoon training, and night watch. The training sessions have you receive coaching from one of the 6 Flower Division members, each with their own associated stat focus. Going in order, there's stamina, which isn't a proper stat so much as it is the energy pool that determines how much you can train. Then there's intellect, which you get from Koran, naturally. Following that, Iris will help you level up your spirit power, Kanna will help increase your guts, Sumire will increase your agility, and Maria will improve your accuracy. Sakura's training, meanwhile, is essentially the wild card. Her training will increase 2 random stats per session, with the only exception being the intelligence stat. That one's a Kodan exclusive. Every training session depletes a fixed amount of stamina. If you run out of stamina once, you pass out and miss the rest of the day's worth of activities. Pass out a second time, and Yoneda sends your ass back home. Game over. You can refill your stamina either by skipping a training session in order to rest, which will cost you that potential stat growth, or by consuming a recovery drink, which you can unlock upon completing the game at least once. Drinking it doesn't cost you time, though keep in mind you are limited to 1 recovery drink per playthrough. As mentioned previously, you have morning training and afternoon training. For morning training, your coach is predetermined based on what day of the week it is. For afternoon training, you get to pick who you want to train with, so that you can brush up on whichever stat you want. Saturday has no afternoon training, which is instead replaced by your weekly mock battle, where you get to put all that training to practice. Sundays, meanwhile, are your day off, with no training at all. Your free time, on the other hand, is spent wandering the theater and talking to familiar characters throughout, much like the original games. However, there are 3 big distinctions to how GB handles these segments. First, this game's version of the lip system, while identical to the original at first glance, features one key difference. The order of the choices presented is always randomized. If you were to play any given scene to its conclusion, then quit and reload your save, you'd find the options are all in different places. On top of that, there's also a lot of options that are similar at first glance, intentionally designed as such to trick you into picking joke answers. This meant that, even if you had a translation guide, following along would still be tricky, which made this game quite difficult to play for non-Japanese speakers until the fan translation dropped. The second big difference from the original game's adventure parts, and the one that changes the entire dynamic of the game and how you approach it on a fundamental level, is the action limit. You are only allowed 1 interaction per free roam period before you are whisked away to your next training session. Whereas I griped about the removal of action limits in the PS4 reboot in my Sakura Wars 2 video, this game represents the complete opposite extreme. You are forced to make a binding decision in every free roam period at the expense of any others. What's more, the difficulty of this choice is compounded by the third major difference to the adventure part. You see, it's not just the locations of the lips prompts that are randomized, but the locations of the characters themselves, too. All you ever see on the map at any given moment in time is a bunch of exclamation points, each one of them indicating that a character is currently there. Which character it is a mystery, at least at first. You can naturally suss out some patterns. For example, almost nobody goes down to the hangar except for Koran, so if you see an exclamation mark down there, odds are it's her. Still, there are many times you'll walk into one area expecting one character, only to run into another.
Surprise, bitch.
Every so often, as you're interacting with the various characters, you'll encounter a familiar series staple that, surprisingly enough, actually made the jump here: the minigames. There are 6 minigames, 5 of which are all original, from what I can tell, while one of them, Maria's, is a demake of sorts of her minigame from the Sakura Wars Steam radio show fan disc. I particularly like Koran's, wherein you're given a box of gears and have to determine where to place them in each machine that passes by, based on visual approximation alone, trying to complete as many machines as possible within the time limit. Iris's minigame is also a lot of fun, if you don't mind furiously mashing the A button repeatedly to keep Jampo afloat with psychic power. It's a particularly good minigame to use for grinding points. What these points are good for, I'll touch upon later. There is one more minigame of sorts, red light, green light, but it's locked to Iris's route, doesn't show up in the minigames menu once unlocked, and doesn't award points upon completion in free play, so it's kind of its own thing. Finally, we have the combat sequences, which are nothing like the battles you're used to by now. Rather than the turn-based strategy battles of the main games, you're engaging with semi-random, fully text-based battles controlled entirely via lips prompts. If you think this sounds weird and clunky, it is. It's a wild RNG nightmare at the start, where you can do practically nothing but flail at the controls and hope for the best. The stats you raise through your training will help make these sequences more manageable, but some stats are more vague than the rest as to what they do. You can choose to pilot the Kobu of any member of the Flower Division, with each of them specializing in the stat corresponding to their original owner's training. Sakura and Kana's Kobu are close range, Iris and Sumina's are mid-range, and Maria and Koran's are long range. The short-range Kobu can only attack from up close, whereas the longer-range Kobu can attack from up close as well as further away. The more range a Kobu has, though, the weaker its attack strength at closer range. The enemy Wakiji will move around at random, requiring you to either get closer or back off, which can often take up a turn you could have instead used for attacking. The close-range units do at least get a body blow option to get close and deal damage at the same time, albeit at the expense of some of their own health. Though you don't get penalized for losing these mock battles, it does count towards your final ranking, plus the owner of the Kobu you were using congratulates you if you do win, giving you a significant boost in trust and making obtaining their ending that much easier, so it's definitely in your best interest to do well in these. So now with all that out of the way, it's time to talk about the meat of the main story itself. Of which there's frankly not a whole lot to talk about. The game is very light on plot. Our story takes place during the events of the main game, around Chapter 4 to be precise. They never state this outright, but the Flower Division spends a good chunk of this game rehearsing for Journey to the West, the play featured at the start of Chapter 5, and the dates depicted in the game happen to match up exactly with July 1923, while Iris's birthday is July 5th, and we see her birthday in Chapter 4. And I know this is becoming a tangent, but god damn it, I had to fit this trivia in here somewhere. Anyway, there is a fixed overarching plot, but it's really not important. That's not what you're playing the game for. The game opens with a prologue, where your as-of-yet nameless protagonist dude is enjoying his time at a local festival. He then gets approached by none other than Ayame Fujieda, Vice Commander of the Imperial Combat Review, who asks him if he'd like to join up for a trial enlistment of 30 days. We say yes, get a letter in the mail saying we've been accepted, and we're whisked away to the theater, where we meet with Yoneda and enter our name. We meet the Flower Division, and once introductions are over, it's time to hop in a Kobu and fight a Wakiji. A big ask for someone who hasn't even been on the force for 10 minutes. Whether or not you win this first mock battle isn't a big deal, because for the next 30 days, you're going to be training to get better at it. At the end of your first week, everyone in the review holds a welcoming party for you, and after being subjected to a barrage of questions, the fun gets interrupted by the alarm. A mech has been sighted causing trouble in Ueno Park, but not just any mech, the perpetrator is a Kobu. You show up on the scene only to find it empty, and can only guess as to where the pilot went. Fast forward to the last Saturday of the month. Your final mock battle before your final exam gets interrupted by yet another alarm. The Kobu's back on the loose, and it turns out this particular unit was equipped with an experimental autopilot system all along. The others go to subdue it while you're forced to stay behind and watch the fort. They screw up, the Kobu slips past them, and it's up to you to fight it for real. The Kobu gets subdued, you take your final exam the following Monday, and watch the ending you earned. And you're finally issued a rank, based on your stat totals, combat history, and your performance in the final exam. The end. To be completely perfectly honest, the first time I played this game, I kinda hated it.
I think Sakura Wars GB sucks.
Seriously, back when I first dreamed up this video series, the original plan was to briefly touch upon this game and move on, treating it as barely an afterthought. As I'm sure you can tell by looking at this video's actual runtime though, my thoughts regarding the game have changed considerably. So now you're probably wondering what it is that I initially found so repellent about this game. For one, the game does a very poor job of explaining itself to you. Everything feels wildly arbitrary and random. The battles initially feel like a coin toss. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason behind why you win or lose. You have a super meter, but charging it all the way up doesn't seem to do anything but waste your time and open you up for hits. You increase stats through training, but outside of the self-evident accuracy, it's hard to figure out what they actually do. Outside of battle and training, things don't seem that much better either. Sometimes talking to a character results in a full conversation, other times it's just, hi, bye. Now, this wouldn't be a problem if you weren't limited to one interaction per free roam segment, but as we've established, it's all or nothing. Even when you do get to talk to them though, they don't have much to say that's terribly fascinating. The characters are mere shells of their normal selves, boiled down to their base characteristics. They've all got a bad case of the Persona 4 spin-off syndrome. They're either reciting random trivia like what their favorite food is, or they're simply repeating things from Sakura Wars 1, if not outright recreating moments from it.
I clapped when I saw it!
We're still, at the end of my first playthrough, I got the Ogami ending, which is the default ending you receive when you haven't built up enough rapport with any of the other characters. In other words, the bad ending. I had no clue what I did wrong, received no indication that I wasn't on the right path. By the end of my very first playthrough, I walked away with the impression that this was just a poorly designed, slapped-together, cynical cash grab. I know all that makes the game sound pretty bad, and I'll admit some of those criticisms do hold true all this time later. When I was asked to help out on the fan translation, I even told the team, you know this game's kinda crap, right? However, the more time I spent working on the translation, the better I got to know the game. A lot of my misunderstandings were cleared up, my misconceptions were disproven, and I developed a greater appreciation of the game's strengths and what it did manage to pull off. First, the combat makes a lot more sense once you've figured out what each stat actually does. Intellect affects what options are available to you in battle. Some options, such as dodge, are only available at a high intelligence level. This is why I highly recommend training with Koran a whole lot, even if you aren't going for her ending. Spirit Power and Guts, meanwhile, affect your damage output. Piloting Iris's Kobu lets you use the Teleport ability, allowing you to dodge and create distance at the same time. And while you need a certain amount of intellect in order to use this ability, its success rate increases the higher your Spirit Power is. Agility is an incredibly versatile one too, as it affects the success of your defensive options and extends the time limit for each combat lips prompt. Accuracy, well, that one was self-evident straight from the jump, wasn't it? Learning all this helped make the combat click, giving me a better idea of how to properly optimize my character for each run. Granted, despite your stat allocation, you are still at the mercy of the RNG a lot of the time, and it can be quite absurd. Sometimes you can get totally wiped out, reload a save, then mop the floor with the enemy, despite nothing being different and fighting the exact same way. There's also one instance where I was fighting the autopilot Kobu at the end and got caught in a 2-minute loop of trying to back away, getting approached, and dodging incoming fire. It's for times like this, though, that super moves come in handy. That's right, the game actually does have a use for the super meter after all, but it's not as straightforward as it would be in the regular games. Early on during your stay, as you go on your night watch, you might find some of the characters hanging out in their rooms. If you go visit them, they'll offer to give you something to help pass the time. Sakura offers you a cactus to raise, Sumire some herbs to grow, Maria a book to read through, Iris a stuffed animal to keep company, Kana a board to break, and Koran a jigsaw puzzle to complete. During your free time, you can opt to stay in your room and perform whichever activity has been assigned to you via this focus button, instead of wandering the theater and talking to the others. It's actually for times like this that those hello-goodbye situations come in handy. If the character whose ending you want doesn't have anything of substance to say, that's your sign to reset the game, reload your save, and do your activity instead, safe in the knowledge that you won't be missing out on those precious trust points. After tackling these activities enough times, you'll finally complete them, and as a reward, the character whose activity you completed will show you their super move, with these really cool animations that look practically straight out of a Neo Geo Pocket fighting game.
Power Kaiser!
Now that you've seen their move, you'd be forgiven for thinking you could use it whenever, but no, you still can't. In fact, you can only ever use it during the battle with the autopilot Kobu, where it acts as a one-hit KO. Except for Iris's, which acts as a full heal. Okay, so the combat makes more sense now, but what about the adventure part? The game is still fairly obtuse about how best to proceed to get the ending you want, and if you approach it exactly like one of the mainline games, you're only going to get burned. No, instead what you want to do is pick a girl at the very start and relentlessly stalk her for the rest of the game. Seriously though, you'll want to commit 100% to the girl whose ending you want. Whenever you have free time, go find and talk to her. As I mentioned earlier though, they all show up as random exclamation points on the map, so knowing exactly where to go would be hard, right? That's why, every Monday, you have to go out of your way to talk to Yuri or Kasumi to ask where you can find the girl you're looking for. Doing so will mark their location on the theater map for the entire week. With that done, all that's left to do is talk to your girl at every single possible opportunity, barring the dreaded hello-goodbye scenarios. You should use these opportunities to do your focus activities, like mentioned before, or go talk to Yuri or Kasumi some more, which will often trigger special events in later free periods. So, having used all this knowledge myself to go through every single character's route, do I still think they're all hollow caricatures of their regular selves? Well, yes and no. Since this game is an interquel, there's not a whole lot they can do to develop the characters while still remaining consistent with the series canon. As such, the characters often default to their familiar tropes. Kana's always hungry, Maria likes her books, Koran is always causing explosions, and so on. However, that's not to say the game doesn't find fun ways to express the character's individuality. For instance, in the original Japanese version, Sumire will always get your name wrong for the first few hours, usually by swapping out one hiragana or katakana character with another similar one. However, for the fan translation, this isn't something we could easily replicate without making Sumire spout total nonsense, due to the differences between the Latin alphabet and the Japanese kana syllabary, and how they function on a programming level. Instead, we opted to make it so Sumire obstinately refuses to learn your name, though she will say it after all on certain special occasions. Either way, it's a neat Sumire-like touch that livens up your interactions with her, and it shows a nice attention to detail. Speaking of Sumire, each member of the Flower Division also has their own little through line of sorts. Not exactly what I'd call a subplot for most of them, but little threads and recurring activities, which take the form of a day-long event that costs you the opportunity to train that day in exchange for the potential to gain huge trust boosts for that character. Sakura will ask you to help out with various chores, Kana will ask you to help her lab her new combos,
Light punch!
Koran will ask you to help run maintenance on the Kobu, etc. Sumire easily has the most substantial one of these, where she teaches you proper table manners, with it all coming to a head when she needs you to tag along for a luncheon with Yoichiro Makibishi, a character you likely don't know by name, but will remember as the nerdlinger Sumire was about to be wed to in Sakura Wars 2. Seriously though, Sumire fans are eating good in this game. Once you've reached a good enough rapport with a given character, they'll ask you later on in the game if you want to join them out for a day out on the town. A date, in so many words. The first one is a great chance to build up a ton of trust points, whereas the second, taking place after the battle against the autonomous Kobu, is primarily there as denouement, not to mention a moment of relaxation before your big test. However, the second date has a crucial, lore-imperative function: to get you friend-zoned. This game establishes a crucial foundation for all spin-offs going forward. Nobody, under any circumstances, is allowed to cuck Ogami. No matter how hard you try, the girls will not become romantically involved with your self-insert. I'm sorry, you just can't compete with this. That being said though, you still receive a little gift from the character of your choice, and when it comes time for you to go home, they'll track you down one last time during the game's ending to personally hand you a ticket to the next Flower Division production so that you can come see them again. On a different note about the game's writing, it's also a lot funnier than you'd probably expect, especially when it comes to the options you're given as the player. Ogami gets some humorous options in the other games, sure, but the player character in GB can say and do some truly unhinged shit. For starters, you can be a total bastard to everyone. You can be especially nasty to Iris, I've noticed. If you don't feel like being mean though, you could always try being clean. By which I mean drinking soap. Or varnish. Maybe you'd rather consume some normal food, but even then, you're presented with some unique ways of doing so. Don't go too overboard with the food though, or else you might become cartoonishly fat and unable to fit in a Kobu, resulting in you being discharged and getting a game over. What, you thought running out of stamina was the only way to get a game over? Guess again. Most of the game overs in this game are goofy as hell and come at you out of nowhere. Like, sure, Koran might be able to withstand an explosion, but that doesn't mean you can. Honestly though, I could think of worse ways to go than being grievously injured by Best Girl. Game overs aren't even that frustrating to get either, assuming you've been saving often. For every different game over in the game, the first time you discover it, Best Boy Kayama shows up and awards you with bonus points as a consolation. As such, you're arguably incentivized to seek out every unique game over. So in a way, the game encourages you to act a fool, be reckless, and get in trouble, thus getting you to see all the personality tucked away beneath the game's straightforward surface. Which brings me back to an earlier thread. You may be asking yourself, why should I care about points anyway? Well, these aren't points in the high score sense, no. These points are your currency. After beating the game at least once, you get to access the Taisho Romando GB shop, so named after the real-life Taisho Romando store that occupied the 5th floor, and later 7th, of the former Sega Ikebukuro Gigo arcade from 1998 to 2008, as well as some minor satellite locations throughout Tokyo. Whereas the real-life stores were filled to bursting with Sakura Wars merch, the GB store is instead home to all the game's unlockables. Some of these are items that substantially affect gameplay on subsequent playthroughs, and others are bonus content such as sound tests and image galleries. These items tend to be fairly pricey, but you can earn points by either discovering new types of game overs, or by grinding minigames in the free play mode. Well, actually, there is another way. Enter the Kinematron menu, where you can access all of the game's communication features. This game doesn't have multiplayer, but rather a suite of data transfer options. For one, you can transfer data between 2 copies of the game, albeit only via infrared and not via link cable. Go figure. Doing so will mutually unlock whatever items in the shop one player has that the other player doesn't yet have, as well as an item index detailing all of the key items you've picked up across all of your playthroughs. However, the more interesting of the two presented options is to link up with the Pocket Sakura. First, a little bit of background. In 1998, Nintendo and Jupiter collaborated to create the Pocket Pikachu, released in the West as the Pokemon Pikachu. This was followed up the following year with Pocket Pikachu Color Gold and Silver Together, released in the West as the Pokemon Pikachu 2 GS. These were virtual pet toys like a Tamagotchi, only equipped with a pedometer that would convert your footsteps into a currency known as watts, and the second color version would let you transfer them to a copy of Pokemon Gold or Silver. Those of you keeping track at home may have noticed that the Pocket Pikachu and Sakura Wars GB share the same developer, Jupiter, which makes what happened next make a lot more sense. In 2000, to coincide with the release of Sakura Wars GB, the Pocket Pikachu Color would be converted wholesale into the Pocket Sakura, featuring the exact same shell mold and the exact same model number on the back, only with a little SK tacked onto the end. However, it wasn't just a simple reskin, as you might initially be led to believe. Instead, the game is framed as you and Sakura going on a walk together throughout Tokyo. You open up the menu, select where you want to walk to, and off you go. Every step you take in the real world with the Pocket Sakura equipped counts towards this journey, with the amount of steps required to reach each destination listed under each option in the menu. Once you've arrived at your destination, you can choose to explore it and walk a little further to visit various landmarks in the area. After you visit enough landmarks throughout Tokyo and return to the Grand Imperial Theater, Commander Yoneda grants you authorization to travel the rest of Japan. Then, after traveling from Tokyo to Sendai to meet Sakura's mom, Wakana Shinguji, and talking to her twice, talking to Yoneda again will grant you access to the rest of the world, or at least Asia and Europe. At this point, you can find all the other members of the Flower Division in their respective home countries or regions. Kana will be in Okinawa, Koran's in China, Maria's in Russia, and so on. For what appears to be a mere virtual pet at first blush, it's a surprisingly robust package, featuring an astonishing amount of written dialogue with all the characters you can meet, as well as a ton of unique graphics. Look at all of Sakura's little outfits. It's not exactly an intricate gaming experience or anything, but it's a neat novelty, not to mention a good incentive to exercise. To get back on track though, if you opt not to choose a location to travel to, any steps you get will instead be converted to points. You can spend these points in the Pocket Sakura itself to ride vehicles to your destination, covering thousands of steps worth of distance in a matter of seconds, or you can use them to gamble in an attempt to win even more points. Of course, these points would be better spent in GB, which is why you can connect the Pocket Sakura to a copy of GB via the Game Boy Color's IR sensor to transfer points from one to another. By simply linking the two, regardless of whether points get exchanged or not, you will unlock special bonuses in GB. You'll unlock a Sakura Pedal cursor option in the shop, which is nice and all, but the real boon is the equipment you unlock based on your cumulative step count. For instance, walking over 200,000 total lifetime steps with the Pocket Sakura will unlock an item in the Romando GB shop that, once equipped, will raise your intellect every time you train. For example, when you train with Sumide, your intellect will increase alongside your agility. You get more equipable item unlocks every additional 200,000 steps, with the final one unlocking at 1 million, but as of this recording, I only have 322,000 lifetime steps, so, I've still got a ways to go. Now, if you'll allow me, I'd like to go on a bit of a tangent for a second, but I promise this is leading somewhere. If there's any one aspect of Sakura Wars GB that I truly admire, the thing that made my opinion of it skyrocket over time, it has to be its ambition. My first impression of it was that it was a lazy cash grab, when in actuality, that couldn't be further from the truth. Its graphics are a showcase of expert sprite work, demonstrating the true capabilities of the Game Boy Color, topped only by its sequel, Sakura Wars GB 2, and the Game Boy Color ports of Tokimeki Memorial. It's packed with content, despite what the short length of an average playthrough may lead you to believe. You've got numerous routes with unique events, abundant dialogue, and a variety of amusing minigames. It's even stuffed to the gills with voice acting. In fact, most of the cartridge's 4 megabytes of space are taken up by voice audio, and crazier still, most of it goes totally unused, at least in the original Japanese release. You see, in the original release version of the game, All the characters have a single voiced line of dialogue in their endings before the credits roll. However, while working on the fan translation, our programmer, Dan Gia, made an incredible discovery. There was voice acting for all the other lines in each character's ending, sitting there on the cart, left mysteriously unused. We could only guess as to why they were never properly implemented. Dan was able to put them back in with minimal trouble, and thanks to his efforts, the world gets to hear voiceover from the original cast that went totally unheard for over 20 years. With all this in mind, Sakura Wars GB is easily one of the finest technical showcases on the Game Boy Color. In spite of its many limitations, it manages to evoke the feeling of its console counterparts. What might be its most ambitious feature, though, is actually totally inaccessible, and even hacking the game would only give you half the intended experience. You see, there were originally plans to have Sakura Wars GB connect to the Dreamcast port of Sakura Wars 1. Doing so would have let you unlock exclusive bonus features in GB, as well as make other unlockable features in the game easier to access than via their normally intended methods. Flashback to issue 531 of Weekly Famitsu magazine, which featured an interview with Tetsu Kayama, chief director of a company known as Marigold Management. Marigold Management was a joint venture between Nintendo Company Limited and a human resources firm known as Recruit Holdings Company Limited, made primarily to foster development for the N64. At the time, Recruit owned Media Factory, Sakura Wars GB's eventual publisher, with Kayama also serving as its president. In this interview, the existence of Sakura Wars GB was very casually revealed, although the details were extremely scant, basically boiling down to 1. It's happening, and 2. They were aiming to have it released by the end of 1999, a target they didn't quite make. The dearth of any concrete details didn't stop the news from making waves though, forcing Sega's then president and Sakura Wars executive producer Shoichiro Irimajiri to put out a public statement on the matter via Sega's official website, saying, quote, "The contents of the Weekly Famitsu article were a unilateral announcement from Mr. Kayama. While it is true that we received a proposal from Mr. Kayama to publish Sakura Wars on the Game Boy Color, we at Sega have one condition for this proposal. That condition is to have the Game Boy Color and the Dreamcast connect to each other. For Mr. Kayama to have announced the Game Boy Color version of Sakura Wars must mean that he has a clear idea of how to fulfill this condition, though we at Sega have yet to receive any concrete details regarding this. If this is true, then we are very much looking forward to it." Marigold released their own follow-up statement shortly thereafter. Following talks between Tetsu Kayama, chief director at Marigold Management, and Shoichiro Irimajiri, CEO of Sega Entertainment, we can confirm an understanding has been reached with regards to the development and publishing of the Game Boy Color version of Sakura Wars. At the same time, we can acknowledge that the two parties have reached a mutual agreement about the connectivity between the Game Boy Color version of Sakura Wars and the Dreamcast version of Sakura Wars 3. For more information, please reach out directly to either Tetsu Kayama or Nintendo Company Limited CEO Hiroshi Yamauchi. These frankly bizarre statements are the only official public-facing confirmation that the game was originally meant to feature Dreamcast connectivity at some point in time. Not only that, but it was initially envisioned for Sakura Wars 3, and not the Dreamcast port of 1 like it turned out in the end. Now, you might imagine this connectivity would have been achieved with something like, say, a cable, much like how the Neo Geo Pocket could link with a Dreamcast for various games using the Dreamcast link cable. Alas, no. The truth is actually far weirder. Tetsu Kayama and Marigold Management were no strangers to pioneering bizarre video game peripherals. Some of them were actually ahead of their time, like the 64GB cable, which would have connected the Game Boy Color to the Nintendo 64 as a second screen experience, basically a precursor to the Game Boy Advance to Gamecube link cable. The games that were at one point confirmed to use it were Derby Stallion 64 and DT Lords of Genomes, both of which were also Media Factory games. This peripheral was eventually cancelled. But perhaps their most famous, or dare I say infamous experiment, was Hey You Pikachu and its voice recognition unit, developed by Umbrella, one of the many developers supported by Marigold Management, with Kayama himself serving as a manager on the project. With this peculiar pedigree of puzzling peripherals, it's no wonder they concocted a similar scheme for Sakura Wars GB. If you were to play the Dreamcast version of Sakura Wars 1, beginning to end, then enter the One Long Day in the Imperial Theater mode and visit the room of any character whose ending you got, you would see this funny little TV icon with a rapidly cycling series of patterns. You would also see a similar icon when completing a minigame in One Long Day mode, only with the frame colored blue this time. For decades, nobody knew what these icons were even for. The game's manual only says, in One Long Day mode, you may occasionally find a TV mark. Remember where these marks appear, something good may happen. Well, as it turns out, these TV marks are the game's method of communicating with the Game Boy Color. This was rumored for a long time, but was officially disclosed in an interview in Sakura Wars Serenade, a Sakura Wars tribute book from 2021. In it, Naoki Hori, the CEO of M2, the developer who oversaw the Dreamcast port, revealed he didn't even know what these barcodes were specifically for, and assumed they would be used in conjunction with a camera of some kind. Series producer Noriyoshi Oba, who served as chief producer on the Dreamcast version, backed up the claims that the Link function's development was strangely one-sided, saying that while his memory of the development isn't clear, he recalls that the only thing they did was display the barcodes in the game, and that the developers on GB would simply make do with it. He ended by saying that whatever the reason for the feature's eventual cancellation was, it was probably due to Nintendo themselves. At any rate, no matter what you try, you won't be able to do anything with these barcodes, because the peripheral that enabled this cross-system communication never actually made it to market. It was never formally announced or advertised. It was as though it never even existed in the first place. The only trace of this peripheral's existence in either game is a sporadically appearing option in GB's Kinematron menu. Seriously, it's not listed or pictured in the manual as an available option, and it only ever shows up on one of my Game Boy Colors, but not the other. Spooky stuff. Trying to access this option, when available, will show a diagram detailing how this peripheral was supposed to work. You'd plug it into the Game Boy Color's link cable port, hold it perpendicular to your TV, and scan the flashing barcodes in the TV mark in the Dreamcast game to unlock bonus rewards. Okay, that's already kinda weird, but somehow it gets even weirder. According to the GB Fan Translations programmer, Dan Gia, the game never actually checks the link cable port for data reading. Instead, when attempting to access this feature, the game checks the Game Boy Color's IR port. This would mean that, based on this information, the TV adapter would have converted the flashing barcodes into an IR signal and beam it into the IR port to transfer the data. It's worth mentioning that the TV adapter option only appears on Game Boy Color, which has the IR port, and only appears in emulators that implement IR port functionality in a very specific way. That being said, I did manage to track down the original patent for this adapter, filed in March of 2000 by both Media Factory and Jupiter, with Tetsu Kayama himself listed as the inventor. The detailed description of the patent, specifically sections 16 and 17, mentions that the data from the adapter is sent via the port the device is connected to, which would be the link cable port. Neither section makes any mention of infrared either. As such, I believe the IR port check found in the code may be either due to a programming error or simply a temporary measure from back when the peripheral was still in development and it just never got fixed once it was scrapped outright. Considering how sporadically it appears on real hardware, this may even have been a quick and dirty fix to hide the feature and pretend it never even existed. Fascinatingly enough, according to this same patent, this device wasn't just meant to unlock pre-existing data on a supported game cartridge and transfer simple information such as high scores, like it was meant to in Sakura Wars GB. The device was supposedly also capable of transferring complex game data, for example, stages, characters, and version updates, from a variety of sources such as TV broadcasts, arcade cabinets, and yes, other game hardware. The patent specifically mentions that this would prevent users from having to buy new versions of a game and instead be able to update or expand the software they already owned. That's right, this peripheral would have enabled patching and DLC on the Game Boy Color, though obviously only for the games that would have supported it. The exact reasons why the adapter never made it to market are unclear. All we really have to go off of is Noriyoshi Oba's supposition that Nintendo themselves had a hand in its cancellation. Nobody can say for sure without a first-hand source. It's a shame too, because otherwise the feature appears to be fully implemented, at least as far as we can tell from the resources we're working with. The feature in-game was referred to as the Dream Collaboration. Whenever you'd scan a barcode from the Dreamcast, the associated character would appear in GB to deliver a message, and then you'd receive an unlock of some kind. At present, there's no way to know whose endings would unlock what, or what exactly the minigames would have gotten you, but we do know what the rewards are. Some of the rewards are the same as what you could unlock via other means, like the in-game shop or linking to a Pocket Sakura. These include harder difficulties for the GB minigames, the Sakura Pedal map icon, and all the stat-boosting equipment. However, there are numerous unique rewards, unobtainable by any other means, and this is where things get interesting. First are the bromides for Orihime and Reni. In the main game, Orihime and Reni make brief cameos during Sakura and Iris' routes respectively, but are otherwise totally absent from the game, since GB takes place before they were formally introduced into the series. They're not even supposed to be here. However, the presence of these secret bromides, along with the fact that they both have unused flags in the game's code for trust levels, suggests they may have had a greater presence at some point. Next is the Portrait Gallery feature. This lets you view every dialogue portrait and background in the game, allowing you to make various custom scenes. However, we also see a ton of backgrounds you never get to see anywhere else. Many of them are recreations of specific moments from Sakura Wars 1, such as the destroyed locker room. This, along with the presence of 8-bit remixes of songs from the first game that are present in the sound test and nowhere else, lends credence to early rumors and assumptions that the game was originally meant to be a straightforward port or adaptation of the first game, rather than a spin-off that just takes place during it. Aside from those two highlights, the rest is fairly standard, if not outrageously generous, such as 90% off discounts for items in the in-game shop, and ludicrous amounts of points to spend in said shop. For more information on all this cut content and more, you can check out the page we on the translation team compiled for the game on the cutting room floor. All this content is there in the game, sealed away in the cartridge, but there's no legitimate way to access any of it. At least, not in the original release version. The English fan translation patch does implement alternate methods of unlocking most of it, so finally, after remaining buried for over 20 years, fans can finally see this content for themselves. It may be minor in the grand scheme of things, but it's exciting to know that, even decades later, people are still discovering new things in these games. Hopefully now you understand what I mean when I say that, despite this game's unassuming appearance as a watered-down facsimile of the original Sakura Wars, it's one of the most ambitious titles to have ever graced the Game Boy Color. Is it a great game? No, not really, but I've come to respect the hell out of it. Even if not all of its ambitions came to pass in the end, Jupiter and Media Factory swung for the fences with this one. At any rate, going back and playing this game so extensively with the English patch has been quite the experience for me. There's a lot of things we have to go back and fix at some point, but I feel confident in saying that everyone involved did a great job. Together we helped shine a light on a unique and oft-ignored entry in the series. Plus we helped uncover a fascinating lost artifact of gaming history, a glimpse into what could have been. Sakura Wars GB went on to debut at number 2 in the sales charts, selling over 80,000 copies in its first 2 days alone. Though it did not maintain this momentum for long, it went on to sell a respectable 120,340 copies before falling off the charts. Its success prompted a sequel, Sakura Wars GB 2, but that wouldn't come for well over another year. I don't think fans of the series minded too much though, because between the release of these two games, Lieutenant Ichiro Ogami had finally reached Paris as Sakura Wars 3 hit store shelves.